Rich Harrington, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, yes. I've heard this has been an interesting event.
Yes. So, okay, so you're the chief product evangelist, and your job is to bring awareness, which you've done an incredible job over the year, just awareness of Luminar. What people don't realize is your background obviously was in video. So I sat in on one of your Photoshop classes or your video classes, and I learned more about Photoshop in your video class. And you smiled at me. And I was like, wow. And just for those that know, Rich is one of the only ones I have no problem editing my photos. He'll just grab a couple of my images, I look over, and he'll start making changes to what I've done. And I'm like, wow. And I take notes to it. So, Rich, with that being said, let me turn it over to you.
Well, sure, absolutely. And actually, that's a nice segue, V, because we're going to be talking about using Luminar and Aurora as plugins right now. And we're going to show a little bit of Luminar and Aurora, as well as how Luminar and Aurora can work together. But I'm going to show you Photoshop and Lightroom Classic. And if we have time, we'll squeeze in photos from macOS. And then we've got a bonus tutorial for about 10 minutes on some wildlife photography of editing some great images of dolphins from our partners over at the World Oceans Day. So we've got some fun stuff. So V, just do me a favor. Let me know when about 20 minutes have passed. Feel free to interrupt me. And we're going to do some fun stuff now, guys. So I want to show you how these tools can work together. And I've already launched Aurora, and I've also already launched Luminar. Actually, you can see I got a lot of apps launched. What I would suggest, if you've never done so, is you can always go under the menu itself and choose Install Plugins. Now, when you do this, make sure that Photoshop and Lightroom aren't running or they won't install correctly. So you need to install the plugins when the Adobe apps aren't running. And we give you the Adobe plugins absolutely free. And so they work great. I saw somebody earlier ask a question about, well, why not Photoshop Elements? We used to officially support Photoshop Elements. While we still don't officially support it now, it actually still works. Just contact the support department and they'll give you instructions on how to manually install it. We just don't officially support it because there were not that many Elements users. And so the company decided to end of life the Elements product. What's happening actually is Adobe's taking the plugin spec one direction and Photoshop Elements is going the other direction. But for right now, they both work. So if you use Photoshop Elements, just contact our support department and they'll show you how to make those two work together. All right, so I want to show you a couple of things that are possible here. And I'm going to show you how these apps can work together, which not everybody thinks through. So I'm going to start actually with Aurora, but then I'll go to Luminar. And first up, I want to show you some stuff that a lot of people don't think about. So Aurora is not just an HDR app. In fact, Aurora is the perfect app if you've got noisy images or underexposed images or tough exposures or images that lack contrast, because it's all about maximum dynamic range. Not just high dynamic range, expanded dynamic range. But here's the thing. I don't care if you're using Luminar or Aurora, please strongly consider stop using the photo edit in command. This is the least tech savvy way to use Aurora or Luminar because it lets Lightroom generate a dumbed down TIFF file and it throws away all the raw information and hands that off. And it's like you're starting at the halfway point. I've seen a lot of presenters today talk about how they tone their images in Lightroom and then they handle Luminar. I want to challenge those of you who are doing it to stop, because you're going to actually see that there's nothing that Lightroom can do that Luminar can't when it comes to color or toning. Now, there are some great organization tools. I love their Upright tool. And as V said, I'm actually a member of the Photoshop Dream Team. I've spoken at Photoshop World for years. I have nothing but love for Adobe. I also just happen to love Luminar and Aurora for what they're great at. So watch this. File, plugin extras, transfer. Use this transfer command. It sends the raw file from Lightroom to Luminar. There we go. Transfers. All the raw data is there, and it's going to open it up. Now, what this is going to do is analyze the image and maximize the dynamic range. So when I tell it to create an HDR from one raw file, what it's going to do is actually what you would want it to do. It's going to perfectly move the shadows and highlights in contrast and white point and black point and exposure. This may sound strange, but I know that there's a couple other products out there that talk about being like the ultimate raw decoder. Aurora is the ultimate raw decoder. It does some amazing things. If you're willing to give it 15 seconds to fix your raw file, when it opens it up, it's basically a ready to go file. And what you're going to see here is how quickly it was able to reach into that underexposed noisy image and bring out detail. Now, to dial in the perfect tone, just use Smart Tone. Not exposure, Smart Tone. Smart Tone lets you dial down the tone or open it up, and as you see there, it improves the dynamic range. Then feel free to tweak up your exposure. Now, some of you are going, I thought this was an HDR app. Why doesn't it look like that ugly HDR look? That's because by default, the smart structure and the clarity are turned off, okay? HDR got a bad reputation because people overdid it. But the technical benefits of HDR are amazing. And people all the time go, oh, I hate HDR. And I go, do you use the shadow highlight slider? Oh yeah, all the time. That's HDR. It's just HDR with training wheels. It's the baby version of HDR. Look at the dynamic range we got here with just opening up that file. It brought out every piece of detail. Great. You don't have to do anything else here. You could just apply and send it back to Lightroom and keep working. Or I'll show you later on how you could send from the app to Luminar and start editing over there. So this makes it easy to just get that image into such a great place. Think of it as your alternative raw decoder. And so it is so good at just bringing out those details. Now, what it's going to do is it's going to tuck it in. And if you're looking at that folder, it will automatically put it back into the same location with that folder. Now, sometimes people are like, oh, I can't see it. That's because you're on previous import. Don't look at what you imported last. Go to the HDR folder. Choose the folder it's in, and it puts it right next to it. If we look at those there, let's just open that up. That's what Lightroom did. And you're like, oh, well, Lightroom could do better. Sure. Let's go ahead and just tell Lightroom to do its thing, right? I'm going to tell it to do an auto exposure, and we'll let it do its thing, right? Hey, do auto exposure, and oh, look at that! It crushed the blacks, totally blew them out. And oh, let's put some texture in, and oh yeah, I really I want some dehaze, right? Okay, that's fine, but it's overdone. All those blue pixels indicate crushed details. Instead, you can run that through Aurora, get that detail, and then you're still fine to use any of that other stuff you would use in Lightroom. But you don't have to overdo that texture and clarity, but you could still use dehaze or anything else. So use it as the excellent starting point. It's going to just jumpstart your photos and bring them to life. But where it really shines is with actual HDR. Now, I know some folks who say, well, I don't need that anymore. Lightroom has HDR. Yeah, Lightroom does have HDR. I use it all the time. The problem with it is this is a Lightroom HDR, right? It's better, but it's not best. It is a 16-bit DNG file. Now, Luminar works in 32-bit. And some of you are like, oh, that's just like twice as good, right? No, it's actually 16 times more information of color. Because every time you up the bit depth from 16 to 17 to 18 to 19, you're doubling the amount of information in the color channels. So it literally has 16 times more tonality information, which makes fixing problems so much easier. So select the files that you shot. Your camera can auto bracket. And what I want you to do is, again, send the raw files. File, plug in extras, transfer to Luminar AI. And what this does is kicks them over into Luminar and allows us to easily improve the image. And in this case, actually, sorry, transfer to Aurora HDR because we're doing the merge. So it's going to open up all that data. I did Luminar there. That was my mistake. One more time. File, plug in extras. I think I'm still hungry from Nicole's presentation. Transfer to Aurora HDR. So what it'll do now is send all of those images together with those different brackets. I could tell it to align, and because we've got a waving flag up there, I'll tell it to do a little bit of ghost reduction, and that gets rid of the flag looking like it was blurry because it's in different positions in each photo. All right, that's great. We'll get rid of chromatic aberration. A lot of people don't know what a chromatic aberration is. Basically, if you've got a high contrast area and a cheaper lens, or you've got a wide angle lens, you're likely to see some color fringe. All right, we'll tell it to create the HDR, and it's going to stitch all of that information together. It's going to look at the best parts. Now, what's different about Aurora from every other HDR tool is that it doesn't use the entire image. It only looks at the parts of the photo that are good. So in that underexposed area, it's looking to pull out the best part of the highlights. And in the overexposed area, it's reaching in and grabbing the best parts of the shadows. And then it merges all of that data together into a new high quality file. So look at what an amazing job it did of bringing everything out. Now, don't worry if it's a touch overexposed, because this is a 32-bit file. It's like a super raw file. In fact, you see how it behaves just like a raw file when it comes to recovering exposure and tonality. So look at how smart tone and exposure work together. And so that just brings it to life. And then if you want just a touch of HDR clarity and smart structure without overdoing it, now when I click apply, it sends that back to Lightroom. Now, you can use upright in Lightroom. You can use any other adjustments. But the fact of the matter is that if we put that head to head with what Lightroom created, there's nothing to compare. So here's the Lightroom version, right? Look at how flat the color is. Here's the Aurora version that has been optimized. And oh, by the way, you could still use anything you love about Lightroom. So if you need lens correction, you could apply that, right? I could actually take this file here, which has the lens profile correction applied, select this one and say sync. And the Lightroom stop, that's really funny. So the sync command shortcut for Lightroom is the same shortcut for stop screen sharing in Zoom. That's what just happened there, guys. I was like, why did it stop? It's because I used a keyboard shortcut. That'll teach me to be fancy. All right, here we go. So we were back over here in Lightroom. And so what I can do is tell it to synchronize those. So easy enough, we'll just go in and we can apply that. So develop settings, and that's great. Sync settings. And all I'm going to have it sync now, let's just go ahead and say check none, is I'll have it sync all of the lens corrections. There we go. So you could take the lens corrections that you were using in Lightroom and apply it to the TIFF. So if there's something you love about Lightroom, use it. But the truth of the matter is Aurora blows away what Lightroom can do for depth and tonality. So feel free to reach into that. By the way, if you're working in inside of Lightroom, same thing. Maybe you've done some basic editing and you realize that you sure would love to hand that image off to get a little bit more detail, right? Well, no big deal. You could totally do that. So let's just take a fashion shoot here, right? And this is some great photos from photographer Jessica Kubasi. And I'm looking at this, and we're fighting with Lightroom, we're trying to develop it, we want to really rescue those highlights and shadows, and okay, that didn't look good. Look at that auto, right? It got the lights great, but it totally crushed the bodice, and it blew out all the walls. And I hate the way the skin looks here. Now, we could fight with this, or we could play here and do that shadow highlight dance, right? You move the shadows, you move the highlights, you drag on the histogram, you turn on the clipping. Guys, it's like Elia Liccardi said earlier in the day, just because this is how you've done it for 15 years doesn't mean you would do it this way if you didn't have to. So you know it, but you don't need it. So instead, go ahead and say File, Plug in Extras. And when you do, you could send that to Luminar, transfer to Luminar AI. It's going to do that handoff and just send it. Now, I already had Luminar AI running. In fact, it looks like I've got it running 3 times. So let me just close one of those. There we go. Cancel. 1 second. And when you transfer that, there you go. See, it sent it over. And this is the actual raw file. So what I can now do is use Accent. I'm sorry, but Accent kicks the auto button's butt. Okay? Accent is designed to just fix these things. Look at how it balanced that. A little bit of structure, and we're going to get perfect blacks and definition there on it. But using boost, we can nail it. Then let's use details. And I could bring out the details gently. Notice how simple that is. By the way, you need to use those Luminar or those Lightroom profiles. They're all right there. Look, camera standard, camera faithful. So if you've got those installed, you can access the same ones here and actually access your camera's portrait mode or the faithful or standard mode. They're all right there. Or if you prefer the Adobe color space, there it is. You can load it so it uses the exact same color model as Lightroom. Just choose Adobe Standard. As long as you got Lightroom installed, we see all those profiles. So now look at Smart Contrast. Smart Contrast is beautiful because it lets you refine the contrast without shifting the color. Now I got great blacks. That's so much better as a base exposure, right? I love it. And besides fixing things, remember, we've got a sexy vignette. So you don't have to go right to the center of the photo. Why would I put the vignette around her chest? I want the vignette around her face. So this allows me there to adjust it because we could choose the subject and set the vignette to be centered on her eye. So that's what choose subject does. And look, we can also add a little inner light. Plus the ability to use our portrait tools means that we could gently lift the face with face light. Look at how easy that was to hand off. We can go ahead and put just a little color there, and I'll enhance the eyes and put a little vignette there to thicken the eyebrows. Now, I want you to appreciate, we'll just let that load in there at full quality. I want you to see that we're really able to just fill that in. Now, there is a little noise because it was a very high ISO shot. So a lot of folks go, oh, you need a noise tool. We've got a noise tool. Just go in and take a look at details, and with your details controls, pull down the small details, and it's going to clean up the noise. And feel free with the denoise tool to also remove your luminosity noise very gently. And that's going to clean it up. Or a little bit of color noise there because there was some color noise in the background. So at this point, I feel pretty good. And one other nice way to hide noise and make it look sexy, I know Nicole teased me about this earlier, but it's the mystical tool. This just let us put that beautiful, rich shadows and gentle, soft light. And look at it, it just killed the noise and gave it a film look. Now I click apply, and it's right back into Lightroom. By the way, though, if you wish that that was non-destructive, I know we're almost out of time, V. Instead of opening it in photo or in Luminar, you could actually skip a step and do something really amazing. And so, you know, let's go ahead. There's the Luminar version one, and there is the Lightroom version one. I think what we do works pretty amazing. And if you need to, you could still come in here and finesse. Hey, go ahead and tone down those highlights. Perfect. Now I got rid of that hotspot. There's no clipping. Now, if you're working like this and you want to send the raw file over, remember, one thing you could do is send to Photoshop, and then you're going to get the raw file transferred to Photoshop. So maybe you do this and you say, hey, I like this. This is kind of good. I feel like the midtones were right. Same thing, photo, and you could choose edit in, open in Photoshop as a smart object. Now, you're going to do nothing in Photoshop other than use it as a container because Photoshop lets you use Luminar non-destructively. Now, if I forgot something, double click and I could actually see my camera raw settings. Everything's here. In fact, I could see more than I do in Lightroom. It's funny that Photoshop has a better version of Lightroom than Lightroom does because look at this. Not only can I fix things here like, you know, the lens profile correction, and go ahead and fix that quickly to get rid of distortion. But I love this color mixer. Look at the fact that we got this awesome on image tool. So I could say, hey, you know what? I just want to tone down the saturation here slightly on her face for that hot pink color. Awesome. Click OK. There's the raw file ready to go. Now you can run Luminar or Aurora as a smart filter. It will allow you to apply it. And V will be switching back right after this to do that guest tutorial. And what it does is it hands off this image to Luminar and allows you to use the creative edits. So we could take advantage. Earlier today, we heard from a great portrait photographer, and he said, you know what? I got to admit, I absolutely love how flawless just helps solve problems. Now, in that case, it's a touch strong, but that's okay. Because we'd already done some work in Lightroom, I'm just going to back it off ever so slightly. That looks pretty good to me. Just take the contrast down to reduce it here. Look at how that actually negative smart contrast opens that up. I like that. And it's really simple to get things in the right ballpark. And using our HSL tools, you can still do that same thing. So if I want to tone down the pinks, I could just come in here and tone those down a little bit, which is cool. Now don't go too far. That was a little strong on the face. But the point is, even though there's that crazy color in there, the face tools still work. So we can add face light. We can go in and we can improve the eyes, even with all this crazy light going on, and just brighten the eyes and sharpen the eyes and thicken the eyebrows and remove the dark circles fast and simple. And Vanelli showed this trick earlier. Layer in the same color eyes that you actually have and then back them off to almost no visibility. And then you could use the flare. Or you're welcome to experiment with other colors in there and play with those, but they're great to just bring out the eyes a little bit. Again, when we click apply, it's going to tuck that into the Photoshop file, close and save, and it goes back to Lightroom. And what's amazing is that when you're done, if you ever need to, in Lightroom, you could choose File, Open In, and hand it back to Photoshop. And your layer is intact, your raw file is intact, and Luminar is intact. So all you got to do back in Lightroom is select it again and easily take advantage of that. And you would just say Photo, edit in Adobe Photoshop, and open up the original file. And you're going to see there's your smart object, there's your smart filter. So it's awesome. We've got a special partnership going right now with the World Ocean Days, folks. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it right after this video, but we've got a guest tutorial video. A couple of you were asking about wildlife photography, and that's what we're going to play right now. We've got a short 8-minute tutorial all about wildlife photography, and you're going to learn how to edit this, and then we're going to have our next guest on. So let me go ahead and open this up.
Hello, my name's Charlie Phillips. I work for the marine charity Whale and Dolphin Conservation, or WDC as it's known. Luminar AI, the software that Skylum have developed, is, in my estimation, brilliant. And we've been very grateful that Skylum has sent us some copies of it. And for the work that I do, I photograph dolphins for the charity. And for the work I do, I find it invaluable. It's a very, very powerful tool. And in these days where images are very important, I find it a must-have, really, an absolute must-have. So what I might try and do is I'm going to share my screen with you and go into Luminar AI. And I'll maybe talk you through some of my processes to do a little bit of editing. When I need to do stuff to some images, generally I don't need to do too much, but once or twice you'll find that maybe the light's not quite correct, or something's happened maybe in the exposure. So what I might do, this is a baby dolphin coming to the surface here. What I might do is I might go into the light slider. I'm just going to put my small box over there. And I might just lift the exposure just a tiny bit, not too much. What I might do is I might also go back to enhance. The enhance slider, the accent is brilliant. I love it. And what I might do is I might just put it up to about 30. And that's raised the whole picture. It's wonderful. It's a great slider. It does a lot of things all at the one time. Now, as far as structure goes, I think it's okay. As far as details go, when you go into the details, it's almost like enhancing every single pixel, but you can do it on 3 different levels. You can do large details, medium details, and small details. For this one, I may just increase the magnification up so that I can see what I'm doing to about 100%. That's just about 101. And the tiny details, I think I'll go for some small details first, and we'll raise that up a little bit. And I'll maybe just pull it back down a tiny bit, down to about 9. And medium details, I'll maybe pull that up just a tiny bit. That doesn't look too bad. I'll just zoom back out a little to have a look at that, and that's not too bad. I may go on to just a tiny bit of denoise, a little bit of luminosity denoise. That'll take out any rough edges. And then, now here's one that I love using every now and again, even although it's wildlife that I'm doing. The landscape sliders have a thing called dehaze. Now, dehaze is something that's crept into quite a few photo editors these days. And dehaze is another one that actually just pulls the whole image together. It can enhance the background. It is wonderful for landscapes. But where dolphins and the sea are concerned, it can actually make the picture much clearer. It's almost like a clarity slider. And if we just do a tiny little bit of dehaze, that's just going to tighten that up a little bit. And then if we go back to composition, composition's okay. I don't need to erase anything. The light's fine, and the structure, I'll maybe just give it a tiny little bit of structure, maybe up to about 5 or so. And that'll maybe do that. And then after that, all I need to do is really just size the picture to what I need. What we'll do is we'll just have a little look and show you the difference between that and that. And you see the difference there? It just pulls it up. Sometimes when you're editing photographs, you don't need to be heavy-handed with stuff. You just need to have a fine touch. And that's what I love about Luminar, the AI. It can give you that very, very fine control. Now, here's another photo. This is one that I'm using to show what we use in science to identify individual dolphins. Dolphins are generally identified by their dorsal fins, and the dorsal fins tend to be different shapes and different sizes for each individual animal. And during their lifetimes, they pick up scratches like these 2 horizontal scratches that this dolphin called Rainbow, who's one of WDC's adoption dolphins up here in Scotland. She has a couple of abrasions there. I think she's actually rubbed against something. This doesn't look like maybe teeth marks from another dolphin, but the little gaps at the back of the fin, those actually have been caused in the past, maybe with some rough and tumble with some other dolphins, maybe some males. But she's also got a little bit of shading. On the fin here. She's starting to lose some of the pigment in certain areas because she's getting on a bit, Rainbow. She's a lovely old girl. So what we'll maybe do with Rainbow's fin is I'll just zoom back out slightly. And again, I'll go to the magic enhance slider. And I've already had a little look at this just to see. Untouched, the photograph's quite flat. There's not really much life to it. And I can tell who it is. For me, it's actually not too bad. But to just highlight a little bit how accent can help, if you just gently take it up to maybe about 40 or so, then what that does is that very gently and very subtly actually enhances the background, but it also enhances the actual subject of the photo too. Now, if we go to light, light's not too bad. I've already had a little look at the exposure, and I'll maybe take the exposure just up a little bit. I've taken down some of the highlights because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to accentuate some of the markings. What I might do is I'll show you an extreme version. If we actually take the highlights way up, then what I can do then is I can see some of these marks slightly better, but the background gets a little bit blown out. So I'll just take those highlights back down again. The shadows I've lifted so that I can see these details here. And then go into the details and we'll just give it a light sharpen. Just a tiny sharpen, doesn't need too much. Again, Luminar's great for doing very, very fine adjustments. And then back to the landscape, and I'm going to just try a little touch of dehaze on there. And that'll just pull that back in. And then if I go and zoom in slightly to about 101%, then that's actually nice. I like that. I can see that a little bit better. The edges are better. I can see the tiny little details. And these little marks have been lifted. The big marks are okay. You can see them quite well, but it's the small marks that I'm actually after here. And that's nice. That's exactly what I'm looking for. And you can see yourself, if I just move the slider backwards and forwards from what was quite a dark picture with not a lot of detail in it, you can see the difference. You can see all the detail actually creeping into the photo now. And for analysis, this is really what I'm after. So that's really what I do. After I've adjusted any pictures, then I'll basically just crop them to size and then store them. I normally shoot in RAW and convert to JPEG. And Luminar AI does a wonderful job of doing that. If you want to have a look at the Luminar website, if you go to skylum.com/oceans, that will actually let you know what Skylum have been doing in conjunction with WDC about whales and dolphins and the support, the marvelous support that they're actually giving our work. And also have a look at whales.org as well. So I hope you've enjoyed this brief foray into the marvelous Luminar AI. My name's been Charlie Phillips, and thank you very much indeed for looking.